Hello, everyone. I think you already know me. My name is Paloma Monroy, and I lead their work on remittances reporting and analysis systems for UNCDF. I would like to welcome you all to this third and final Migrant Money webinar on better remittances data for better decisions. Today, we're going to talk about how to leverage technology to capture the full potential of remittances systems generated data. We all know that technology drives data more than any other force. And in the future, it will continue to develop it further. Governments already collect a large amount of data with different use cases. In particular, central banks have begun finding more and more advanced and useful ways of leverage this data to better allocate resources, measure success, and improve the efficiency of policy making. So today we will share our paper on how these central banks can work to enhance the ways they collect, but also analyze data, including remittances, for different policy purposes. Increasingly, there is pushing central banks to work more closely with the industry to improve their data tools. Then we will have one central bank and two technology providers sharing their experiences on the matter. But to start, I would like to share, as usual, the agenda for today's webinar. So first, my colleague David Taylor may share a few insights from the work that UNCDF is doing and from the paper that we published in December, a model for the systematic capture, management, and analysis of remittances data by central banks. After that, we will have presentation from our three panelists. One representative from Central Bank of Rwanda, that will present how the National Bank of Rwanda is leveraging technology-enabled solutions to automate and also streamline the reporting processes that inform and facilitate supervision and remittances reporting in the central bank. We also have two technology providers that will share different innovative solutions and approaches available to adequately support these central banks to measure, monitor, and analyze data. We appreciate their willingness to be part of this webinar and share their experiences. Finally, we will allocate some time for questions from you, the audience. I really encourage you to put all your questions in the chat with your name, your organization, and also who the question is willing to be allocated. So we have an inspiring webinar ahead of us. Let's start. So now I would like to introduce my colleagues and today's panelists. Bios are for the website, in the website for your information. So first we have David Taylor, UNCDF Data System Specialist. Also we have Wilson Kamali, Director of Statistics for National Bank of Rwanda. We also have Marta Kutinska, Head of Business Development of Business Reporting and Advisory Group. And finally, Jens Gabriel Claude, CEO of Global Voice Group. So over to you, David. Welcome.
Thank you, Paloma. My name is David Taylor, and I'm a data systems specialist at the Migration and Remittances team at UNCDF. I've spent the last 12 years working with government bodies across Africa and Asia to develop data-driven decision support systems, and I'll be your moderator for the last of this series of webinars. Yesterday, we heard from regulators and service providers about why we should care about accessing and analyzing detailed, timely, and disaggregated data on remittances. And a very strong case was made for increasing both access and use of this data to inform policy and design of more accessible, cost-effective, and gender-smart remittance products. So the why question naturally leads to the how question. And today's presentations will explore options to design and deploy systems which not only capture and manage transaction-level data on international remittances, but which also facilitate the use of that data in the generation of insights to drive policy and develop products. So before handing over to our suite of panelists, I'd like to share with you the results of our work of the last couple of years, talking to central banks and technology providers, which we pulled together to create a high-level system model for a remittance reporting and analysis system. Sorry, and the next slide, please. The next one, please. Thanks. Transaction level data involves capturing a single record for every cross-border remittance transaction, with no lower restrictions on the value of transactions. You can think of this as each transfer having its own line in an Excel file or spreadsheet. Many central banks are concerned that moving to transaction level data capture will increase compliance burden on reporting entities. However, our research suggests that in many cases, the reverse is true. By removing the need for reporting entities to analyze, aggregate. Sorry, Paloma, could you go back a slide? I'll start again. Apologies. Sorry. The increasing speed and complexity of economic change has necessitated a fundamental transformation in the way that financial regulators collect, analyze, and use data. Central banks are not only becoming more data-driven themselves, but are increasingly relied on by policymakers and private sector to collect and process data to support the formulation of macro and microeconomic policy, as well as to inform investment decisions and product design. This has come at a time when more data is being generated than ever before, and the world is rushing to exploit this untapped value. In order for central banks and financial regulators to fully exploit the value contained in this data, they'll have to make a shift away from traditional aggregated data reporting to transaction-level data capture. This shift will give regulators access to raw transaction data subject to redactions of personally identifiable information that will not only allow them to generate the insights necessary to regulate these complex and fast-changing markets, but also to provide valuable data-driven insights for both policymakers and service providers to ensure more suitable, equitable products are accessible to the broadest possible base of users. Next slide, please. Thank you. Transaction level data involves capturing a single record for every cross-border remittance transaction, with no low restrictions on the value of the transactions. You can think of this as each transfer having its own line in an Excel file or spreadsheet. Many central banks are concerned that moving to transaction level data capture will increase the compliance burden on reporting entities. However, our research suggests that in many cases, the reverse is true. By removing the need for reporting entities to analyze, aggregate, and prepare data and manually fill out standard reporting templates, the amount of time, personnel, and other resources can be significantly reduced. This is done by shifting the burden of data preparation from humans to rules-based systems, which transmit data automatically via an API or similar technology without any human intervention. This shift not only dramatically increases the value and insights which can be generated, but also means that data can be submitted in near real time with no opportunities for human beings to introduce errors or otherwise manipulate the data. The next slide, please. An optimal data capture system is likely to take into consideration two types of data. Transactional data can be thought of as the attributes which could reasonably be expected to be contained within a transfer or payment instruction. These would include, for example, the value of the transfer, the currency, the sending and the receiving entity types. The second type of data is what we call supplemental data. These are attributes which are not necessary for the transfer to be completed, but which are vital in the generation of insights into remittance markets and behaviors. These include gender of senders and recipients, the purpose of the transfer, and the location of senders and recipients. Yesterday's presentations from the Bank of Mexico and South Africa Reserve Bank showed how vital these supplemental data points are to developing effective policy. Whilst new reporting and messaging standards, such as ISO 20022, increasingly allow space for these kinds of data points, in some cases, a separate reporting system is required to capture and report this data alongside the transaction data. This was the approach taken by the South African Reserve Bank, and details of their system can be found on their website. Next slide, please. Sorry, yeah. Ensuring data quality is a hugely important part of any data-driven system. A validation and quality control system performs three essential services. It ensures completeness. It ensures data is properly formatted and meets the predefined standards. It ensures accuracy by applying rules to identify outliers or data points which deviate significantly from expected values. Without an automated data validation module, ensuring data quality often consumes a disproportionate amount of time and energy in the data collection process. The time saved by the proper implementation of an automated system can be deployed in investigating and understanding genuine outliers in the data and their implications for policy and service delivery. The generation and transmission of data. Transaction level reporting is likely to increase the volume and frequency of the data moving between the service providers and regulators, and would significantly increase the burden on reporting entities if data were compiled and transmitted by humans. This is why transaction level reporting must be combined, as far as possible, with the implementation of system-generated data and system-to-system data transfer. More data does not have to imply a higher compliance burden. System-generated data requires moving from submissions that are prepared by humans to submissions that are prepared automatically by a rules-based system. This is actually significantly easier with transaction-level reporting, as the data is sent raw and does not need processing in the same way aggregated data does. System-to-system data transfer involves systems automatically transferring data between themselves based on a given set of rules, such as transmitting data once an hour or once a day, or a certain number of records has been reached. This ensures timely submission of the data and allows regulators' systems to process the data in a manageable chunk. Finally, insight generation and communication. A system can contain the most complete, highest quality, most timely data available, but if there's no way to generate and effectively communicate insights, then 99% of the system's value will be lost. Comprehensive data analysis is often the most underexploited function of data-driven systems within financial regulators, and in some cases, it's missing altogether. Collectively, the function of the previous modules is to capture and manage detailed, high-quality, timely, complete data. And whilst these functions are critical, they should be thought of as the building blocks and not as an end in themselves. Reaching the goal of data-driven decision-making can be supported significantly by the implementation of a data analysis or business intelligence systems. These systems should be visual. They should help analysts to build narratives and tell stories. Without these, it can be hard to make compelling cases for change. They should be accessible. Talking to regulators, we found that data, even within institutions, is often siloed and managed by multiple gatekeepers, making it hard to access. Maximum value can only be derived if these insights can be accessed and used by a diverse range of users, bringing their own insights and context to the analysis. Equally important is that central banks provide access and thus value to external stakeholders. Requesting more data from the market will be much easier if you're going to provide value back in return. Flexibility. Whilst rigid reports can offer a narrow window into remittances, data analysis tools combined with transaction-level data offer the user the chance to generate better, more detailed questions, and then generate answers for themselves. Interactivity. When giving people more access to better data, it's natural that the first thing that's generated is a long list of better questions. Making the analysis tools accessible and interactive will ensure that users can find their own answers and will allow central banks to avoid the trap of being relied upon to run ever more custom analysis for different stakeholders. I'll hand back to Paloma now to introduce our panelists for them to share their own journeys in developing data-driven decision support systems.
Thank you, David. So now I would like to introduce Wilson. So Wilson Kamali is the Director of Statistics at the National Bank of Rwanda. And as you say, today we will share a real example of a national bank, National Bank of Rwanda, development of electronic data warehouse, which is a new revolution in electronic data reporting and management. Over to you, Wilson.
Hello, Martha. Sorry, I don't know. I'm having some internet disruptions. Can you hear me?
Perfectly. Yeah, we can hear you, Wilson.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm having some internet issues here, but quickly, thank you for the introduction. So going through, mine is to share sort of a more practical experience. I think from David's presentation, it's very clear why automation and having more granular information is important for policy making and supervision purpose. So mine is just to share the experience. Next, Paroma. Yes, for interest of time, maybe I can go straight to the presentation, but this is what I want to discuss. So this is more or less covered from David's presentation. This process one was to improve the timeliness compared before on the manual reporting, data coming in after a month or a quarter basis. From the current reporting, we have data more close to real time on a daily basis, improving the scope, the coverage, the granularity. One of the expected objectives was to reduce the burden of manual reporting process from the reporting entity and also at aggregation stage at the central bank level. Also reduce the financial sector players, the burden of compliance costs related to penalties associated with day of reporting and reporting inaccurate information. Next. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So the system, this is the sort of the overview of how the system developed we have over 600 stakeholders connected to the system. The system has the two approach of data flow. One is the automatic data flow for institutions that have core systems in place or MIS systems in place. The other is the file uploads for institutions that don't have core systems. So for our case in Rwanda, the central bank regulates all the financial entities except the capital markets. So here are some of the institutions that do the upload examples of the Forex bureaus that don't do their transactions more or less manually. So when the data is pulled or extracted, it goes different validation stage. Here, of course, for security of the data and the connectivity of the central bank with the reporting entity, they use the VPN channel where data is encrypted from the source. It comes, it hits the central bank encrypted, then the system does the encrypting, does the validation of integrity controls, it does some level of checking, for garbage before it is pushed from the central bank database, and the system notifies where the data is coming from, highlighting the issues within the data. So this is done to minimize garbage in. That's the validation, and then this is done, people are able to access the information data in terms of dashboard or report suites that customize depending on the business users' needs. So this was a system not off the shelf like for other core systems. We know it was specifically designed based on the needs of the central bank. So, and this was done with the support of the Snoida company that is based in Dubai. So in the process of tendering, it was an international tender. So it was very hard for the bank to find anywhere, in central banks that could be having a similar system. Please, next slide. Yeah, so to share experience, this is sort of an overview, the level of granularity for the case of remittances data. It's more or less a transactional level information. So today we are able to have all the transactions done as of yesterday. And this is the minimum of information captured. Payslip number, every transaction has to have a unique number of that, the currency used, the amount received, the country of origin and destination, the beneficiary name, transaction purpose, like David said, identification of the other party origin. So, and this, as I mentioned, comes on a frequency of daily. So, of course, through this process, been challenges in terms of this detailed information not available from all the remittance operators and the banks, given of how the systems are also designed. So if you take the example of the Western Union platform that is used by many institutions, sometimes it's different from MoneyGram or other operators. And some of this information is not sort of mandatory from the platform developers, so this makes it from the local institutions that use those platforms that are developed by different entity to have a change or customize the platform. So it's costly because this requires to contact whoever that did for the Western Union to make a change and bring in new variables. So these are some of the challenges, and some of these platforms, if you want the transaction purpose, and here if we are taking the standard of the ITRS normally used by balance of payment and IMF, so you find the option for transaction purpose. These are hundreds of transaction purposes. So for institutions to be able to accommodate this and have this implemented and embedded in the system, it wasn't easy, and it's not easy for some of the institutions, but we say this is the way to go. So, and again, this was designed with the background of, as money laundering monitoring, because these are also channels that illicit flows can be used as the channels for illicit flows. So that the rationale, of trying to have more granular information also for that to be used by the supervision department. Next, please. Yeah, to summarize, these are some of the output from this detail of information we have. So we have some daily, dashboard that is able to track all the flows from which country to which country, for what purpose, and different reasons. So this is just a snapshot of the outcome of charts to help the end users, make use of and get the insights out of this information. I think this my last slide. Thank you. Oh, sorry. So just to share, learning experiences, some of these things I mentioned about it, the way different institutions defining things differently. Data accuracy remains an issue for some because of missing information or fields from the platform used. Data quality issues at source. So we have some integrity controls embedded within the system, but from the analysis level we're able to identify some of the issues and timely engage the reporting entity for verification and correction. So that is the data validation in process that I'm talking about. And because of this is not only for remittances, but generally the much information that the central bank is pulling for reporting entity, given the skills within the central bank in terms of data analytics. So the bank decided to introduce a data science division to come and use some of this information to complement the traditional tools that the bank does for risk supervision and macroeconomic analysis. So that is what we are working on, and continuing data quality, data validation, which is a process. Thank you. Next, I think that's that. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Wilson. Really insightful presentation. I see we have now 91 participants. I really encourage you now to use the chat, and so many questions to Wilson, to the National Bank of Rwanda. So next, we're going to go to the other side, so that to these technology providers that are providing solutions for supporting central banks. So I have the pleasure to have Marta Kucinska, who is the head of the Business Development and Business Reporting Advisory Group. So today she will share her experience as a leader of the Business Development Department, developing these new projects for central banks and the financial industry. So over to you, Marta.
Thank you very much, Paloma, and welcome everyone. Really glad to be here and to be able to listen to the panelists today and over the last 2 days, sharing experience building reporting systems and platforms. And actually a lot of that is how we work on a daily basis with central banks and regulators and SupTech, supervisory technologies. This is the topic today, actually, and it has also been mentioned over the last 2 days a few times. And the reporting systems and transaction reporting systems are part of this broader landscape of supervisory technologies and SupTech. And what we find, especially over the last years, and I guess that COVID and digitization strategies of central banks also speeded that up, that SupTech is actually high on the agendas and high on the list of strategic developments in central banks for better handling and automated handling of granular data, better analytics for decision making and policy making as well. So this is where we work with central banks and regulators, from data collection platforms, warehousing, analytics systems, and integrating all that. But what I would like to mention today and spend a few minutes of this presentation is the standards that underlie such SupTech designs and SupTech developments that we discuss today as well. Next slide, please. And each such SupTech project is actually a story that takes into account all the local requirements, local regulations, and the context, which is coded in policies and regulations. And hence this triangle that we use quite often, discussing the requirements of the regulators and looking at this local, domestic, and regional context and data needs. And the soundness and coordinated approach to regulatory frameworks has been actually mentioned by some of the panelists over the last 2 days. And while the regulations call for specific data and impose data requirements and obligations on the market. So when introducing policy changes, when introducing policy changes and new regulations, for example, in payments and remittances, it is important to be able to distill the information layer and translate policy clauses and legal acts into actual data requirements, so that the technologies to handle the data are fit for purpose and to build a trusted data ecosystem.
Sorry, Marta?
And yes?
We were hearing two sounds. No, now it's
yeah,
good.
It seems that there is interpretation somewhere as well, so probably yeah.
Okay, now it's fine. Now it's
yeah, the
back to
French
normal.
French interpreter. I guess I've been listening to the French translation as well while speaking. Yes, so yeah,
Please
and
continue. Now it's fine.
Yes, thank you. This is speaking about how to translate policies actually and regulations into data and to distill the information layer. So actually very, very timely that the interpretation and translation kicked in. What it allows us to do is to build the ecosystems that are trusted and that the technologies are actually fit for purpose. And the standards that make this trust possible, these are standards that are used both for data description, data classification, data modeling, and later for data exchange and data analytics. And in fact, data standardization has been mentioned also today by Wilson, sharing the experience of the Bank of Rwanda. And it has been mentioned as a challenge, actually, or an issue to bring in this data harmonization and data standards to all the modules of the platform. So this is indeed an important part of the design of the systems. Next slide, please. We are quite often analyzing the requirements of central banks from the very start, that they are thinking of a design of SupTech platforms and planning their SupTech strategies and developments. So what we see are those shared objectives, and they have been mentioned today as well. And to realize these, central banks actually need trusted and quality data. And what they start with is to look at technology options to automate the data and to get more insights in analytics. And they are actually tempted to start right away to explore specific technologies. So we are often asked about technologies for automated reporting, like off-the-shelf tools, or the application of machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms or specific blockchain applications. And the very interesting topic of machine-readable regulations, where you are able to kind of code the regulatory text into automated and readable, machine-readable data models that in the end enable automated reporting rules and API systems to connect, etc. These are all very interesting developments, and they very much foster the interoperability of the whole SupTech landscape within the organization. But what we actually advise at the very beginning is, like, in order to be able to build consistent and inclusive data reporting ecosystems, is to look in parallel at the building blocks that are provided by existing standards. These are often open standards and open data models that may be reused. Some of the standards that I mentioned here, like XBRL for business reporting or ISO 20022 for payments, these may be relevant for the discussions today. But also starting from the data standardization that we mentioned as well, and the data dictionaries common for all modules of the platform. We have standards like data point model methodologies, and this is one of the methodologies that is used to come up with unified data dictionaries, for example, in Europe, and it has recently been also recognized as an ISO standard. So this is the important part that we very often stress at the beginning of the SupTech journeys, and especially speaking about cross-border payments and remittances, where interoperability of the systems is really important to drive the costs of transactions down and to enable analytics of payments flowing through different channels. The standards provide actually a common language for the systems, for the service providers, and for supervisors. And next slide, please. Ultimately, the standards help central banks to introduce automation for the collection of data and for analytics, and also to foster connectivity of systems internally and with external providers. What is really important is also the transparency and ease of entrance for any new entrants on the market. So when we think about new payment service providers and fintech solutions, new means to channel the payments, using a recognized standard which is understandable by different providers, brings in this level of interoperability for platforms and providers that actually fosters financial inclusion and drives the costs of these ecosystems down. Especially in cross-border payments, the notion of interoperability and it being expensive and driving the cost of processing transactions is quite interesting, where shared standards may ultimately make the whole ecosystem more cost-effective. And I guess that it was by TerraPay presenter yesterday that one of the sustainable development goals of reducing the transactions costs was mentioned also. So actually the standards make it possible along the way. And next slide, please. Speaking about the standards, ISO 20022 is one of such standards that we may mention today. And actually this year, 2022, is an interesting year in the story of this standard. In Europe, the payments in euro, which is a common European currency, and specifically the payments that go through European Central Bank system, Target 2, they will soon be made only in ISO 20022, and similar path is taken also by the United Kingdom and the central bank there. Apart from interoperability of the systems and in general lowering the transaction costs, the standard carries a lot of potential for analytics of the payments data. It defines the building blocks and design patterns for the payment messages. And there is actually a catalog of existing payment messages that can be reused. What is important from perspective of the analytics potential is the possibility to enrich the data carried in such standardized payment messages, meaning that we take the existing messages and they can be made more precise for the specific data needs and as relevant for a given jurisdiction, country, or region. One example useful in analytics of the data are the purpose codes, and I think that Wilson also mentioned the purpose codes in his presentation, where we have the field which allows payment originators to input a specific code to denote the reason for the payment. And actually, the Bank of England published, for example, in their consultation, the codes proposed for the UK. So you may easily find online in public materials how they explain the codes and how the codes will be applied. So there are ones related to foreign exchange, the payment of insurance premiums, for example, or royalties. And this denotation then is standardized and unifies, so to say, the market in their approach. There are messages specific for remittances as well, so the catalog might be actually browsed by the areas. For cross-border payments and reporting, it is worth to have a look at a set of guidelines called Cross-Border Payments and Reporting Plus, CBPR Plus. I haven't put it on my slides here, but I'm happy to share links to all these open resources to just browse through and consult. Such guidelines actually provide a common language for cross-border payments, and one promising way to apply such lingua franca is through regional cross-border payment initiatives. Many regions have focused on these in developing and enhancing regional payment schemes and systems to support trade and, in general, economic and financial integration in the region. Such examples are found in Europe, for example, Single Euro Payments Area, or West African Economic and Monetary Union in Africa. Similar initiatives may benefit not only from examples of standards implementations in specific countries like the UK or in Europe or in West African area, they may benefit also from reusing existing open data models and such reusable messages also for payments, but also from international initiatives. And we have the Bank of International Settlements and Financial Stability Board, like big advocates of finding those common data elements and standardizing the messages and the way that data is classified and described. One such committee is related to payments and market infrastructure, CPMI. They are also an advocate of common data elements. And when we think about transactions, payments, and you think about such identifiers like how to identify the entities, counterparties, we have the legal entity identifier, LEI, we have unique product identifiers or unique transaction identifiers, which in many jurisdictions help to bring those different providers and different systems to some common denominator and some like basic service levels, so to say. Yes, and that next slide, please. I think that it will be just an closing slide. Ultimately, payments is data. So all these parts of the common language that may connect and make the systems and the providers and regulators and other stakeholders more interoperable and understand each other better, ultimately are beneficial for how much we can use the data for analytics purposes. And also, this should be taken into account when shaping the regulatory framework. So when thinking about any changes to the regulations or policies that will impose data obligations on the market, on the banks, payment service providers, micropayment service providers, remittances, etc., this will all ultimately call for some data from them, so shaping those frameworks, looking already at what will be the data ultimately collected and what will be the standards that are encouraged by central banks, by regulators. This is actually one of the key considerations that we very much advocate at the very beginning of the subtech journeys. So thank you very much for those few minutes, and happy to follow up also and with any links to those open standards or further experience sharing as you may find useful for your subtech strategies. Many thanks.
Thank you, Marta. And thank you so much for sharing the importance of having the standards and also the need of comparable. And in Africa, the regional economic communities are working on that and creating a common language for data, and we are supporting. So thank you so much, Marta. And now I have the pleasure to introduce our last panelist. So we are here with James Gabriel Claude, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Global Voice Group. So today he will share his experience providing data-driven solutions for regulators and providers. So welcome, James, over to you.
Thank you, Paloma. And so today I'm gonna talk about how data technologies can really help regulatory bodies and bring transparency within this important sector for so many countries, which is the remittance sector. Please, next. So I'd like to start by just highlighting a few facts. 20% of emerging countries' GDPs today come from remittance. And in 2022, this year, the projection is there will be a growth of 5.5% in sub-Saharan Africa, which is similar to what will be seen globally, 2.6% around the world. Next. Yes, the growing market also includes a few risks that have to be mitigated by service provider, regulatory bodies, especially central banks. This is also the channel through which illicit money flows can happen. There's a clear lack of regulation or policy harmonization between different regulators around the world. So it's also, there is security issues, and of course, all of that money laundries and lack of CTF monitoring and compliance monitoring overall can be a real issue for this such important sector for many countries. In order to tackle these threats, next. We firmly believe that data technologies can really assist government institutions, especially the central banks, to really get a sense of what is happening in this sector, full reporting on transactions, and to effectively fight against money laundering, to automate the process they have in place to monitor inbound and outbound remittance that can help them with the data analytics that can be used for financial intelligence purposes. And also there's an opportunities for background checks using international criminal and financial databases that are available around the world. Next.
James.
Next, please. Next slide. I'm still seeing the same, I don't know, the previous one. Okay, can you please go back? Because I think there has been an issue. I was seeing the previous slide, I was on back. Okay, just after that one. Next. Okay, so how can our technologies, we are a pioneer in the RegTech space in sub-Saharan Africa. We've been providing our technologies, especially to telecom regulators, and with the development of mobile money, which uses the telecom infrastructure as a backbone for its development, we started to provide our services to central bank who they wanted to monitor this new space where mobile money using the telecom infrastructure was going up in many countries, so we started to provide our solutions. So our solutions we capture information from telecom sector, mobile money transactions, and we believe by using the same analogy and capturing using APIs information from the MTOs, we are able to create a consolidated database which the central bank can use to monitor and have all the insights that I mentioned in my earlier slides. Next. So capturing the full potential of remittances generated data will definitely help the telecom regulators and encourage them to go into being able to make informed decision making. So keep in mind, our technologies are definitely useless without the proper regulation. So we come to support the regulatory bodies, and that's why, for example, I understand the challenges faced by my fellow panelists from Rwanda. The lack of granularity in the transactions we are seeing. So I think the regulatory bodies and working together by region can really impose the way or information that should be shared with them. So if the regulation is in place, when we bring our technology, we are able to capture those information and make them useful to them, so they are able to make informed decision making and having a better understanding of the market. Please, next. So how we can help central bank? We believe through our solutions, capturing all the information, using API, being technology agnostic, and allowing whichever standards you are using to be able to capture those key informations. So we are able to provide a list of originating countries for inbound remittances, detailed transaction for each remitter, and data that can turn into actionable information for investigation, analysis, and policy monitoring. Our solution can also enable central bank for data-driven oversight and decision-making. Comprehensive tax collection, because depending on the sector, there might be levies associated to certain transactions, and definitely data intelligence tools that can really improve and protect the remittance sector. Next. So how do we achieve that, and what can be achieved to streamline of that process? We can verify compliance, AML, KYC, get all of those information to country-specific data to allow this evidence-based effective decision-making, implement measures in order to monitor the impact of different policies, and mitigate the risk related to the remittances and de-risking measures, and implement and efficiently manage new taxes or improve the collection of the existing ones. Next. This is my last slide. Just wanted to give you a technical overview. It's quite familiar to the studies that presented earlier by David, where we believe if the regulation is in place, which requires the big Western Union or MTOs through their information system, and we should be able to capture certain key information where we can create this repository of all those elements with the granularity necessary for the authorities to understand the countries where the transactions are coming from, the detail of the remitter, and background check can also be done on the remitters as well after the fact, because database of in many countries, there are different databases that can be shared at that level of criminal in order to avoid money laundering and criminal activities going through that such important sector for the country. Next. Thank you very much. Over to you, Paloma.
Thank you so much, James. So now I think we have 10 minutes open for participant questions. My team has been looking at the chat, and yeah, there's so many great questions, a lot of interest of sharing experiences. So Central Bank have been asking about, different experiences. Is that one? Hopefully with these webinars, we covered that aspect, but I would like also, we're going to share with you the presentation and the recording, but also the paper we have published with many other use cases. But maybe I have a question for Wilson. So Wilson, also you have these dashboards and you mentioned the importance of analysis. Are these analysis dashboards available to other departments in the central banks also? And not only the central banks, are you also sharing that information and analysis dashboards available for other institutions, other ministries, organizations, and the private sector? You can share. Over to you, Wilson.
Thank you. Currently, these are more for internal use. The plan is also to avail some of this dashboard to the public. But apparently they're internally generated. Yeah.
And in terms of departments in the central bank, how many departments are benefiting from this? You mentioned the balance of payments and supervision. Are there other departments benefiting from this, from data from this platform?
Largely, it is statistics, monetary, bank supervision functions, and the top management of the bank. So they're quite interactive. So it depends on what you want to see. You can drill down depending for the different departments' use, and they're flexible, to change, to add on different parameters, or even to interlink, some of the individuals doing the transactions, are they banked or they are non-banked? And you can do quite cross-cutting analysis depending on the purpose and what one would want to see. Yeah.
One of the central banks, Central Bank of Salvador, is asking which are the main countries that issue family remittances for Rwanda.
I would say mainly Europe and USA, European countries leading.
Question for Marta. Marta, in your experience when implementing these new standards that you mentioned, like the ISO 20022, what were the main advantages, or one advantage and one disadvantage, to changing all reporting standards at the same time versus updating them for a single area or project like remittances? Maybe you can mention one advantage and one disadvantage on that. Thank you.
Yes, so maybe instead of like recapping advantages and disadvantages, one important point when considering changing standards and doing that across different systems or across different data sets would be first to do an impact analysis and to just see like how these changes may actually impact which of the parts of the systems and which of the stakeholders in the entire ecosystem. Then in such impact analysis, the advantages and disadvantages of like changing all or parts are probably most visible. Like one big advantage is actually to start with like looking at like when thinking about changing the data standards and the data requirements for that is to look at the data overlaps across different data sets, because different data sets may be reported in different formats, and actually the format is only like the end the last mile, so to say, whether it's XBRL or ISO, for example. But to look at the underlying data requirements and what are the overlaps there, so that underneath you have a unified data dictionary whenever there is an entity identification, for example, used, so that you know that all the systems and no matter what the standard, there is one understanding of how we denote legal entities, for example, or transaction counterparties, for example. And one big advantage of like introducing standards across the organization is to have connections between all different departments internally and externally. So this collaboration part and early consultation internally and with the external market. And this is probably the only way to actually bring in the advantages, not to get lost in introducing a standard that later on the market will be struggling with to adopt. So this would be my answer.
I really like the change approach. Thank you, Marta. Let me see another questions. Maybe one for James. James, usually solutions are set up to collect data from banks or other regulated institutions. So how much effort, based on your experience, does it take to add other providers in the remittances arena, such as the money network operator, the money transfer operators, DLT-based providers, as needs change, as the ecosystems evolve? I don't.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Yes,
Yeah.
okay. Okay. Yeah, very good question. There are different ways of different approaches when it comes to data collection. The advantage we have as a company, our know-how and experience came from the telecom sector, where we are very used to unstructured data processing and capturing. So as long as the information that we need is in the data set, so we are able to get it out and then make it, turn it into valuable information for the decision maker. So I believe it's quite straightforward, the process, because the same kind of infrastructure that we have, it's a matter of making sure through the API that the information that we need through regulations, that is in there. So as long as the regulation requires those NPOs, there are certain things that they need to include, and in terms of connectivity, it's quite straightforward.
Great, thank you, James. And maybe last, I'm gonna ask my colleague David, because there was a lot of interest on other experiences from other central banks. Maybe David, you can share with the participant other central banks who've been doing. Over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, central banks are really at the very, very start of this journey of exploiting detailed disaggregated data and developing data-driven decision support products out of them. So I've put a few links in the chat that people are welcome to explore, and I'd recommend you looking at the paper that I've also linked there for some examples of opportunities. So what a lot of central banks do is, central banks in the last few years have got a lot better at publishing data, and you'll go to the statistics or data sections of central banks and you'll see reams of data which you can download, at worst as PDFs or at best as Excel files, but very few have actually gone that extra step and actually started developing data analytic products which they're releasing publicly. And I think that there's a will to do it, and as we heard from Wilson, there are plans, and I think it's the stage that many central banks are actually at. There's a really interesting example in the Bank of Mexico with their remittances data. They publish amazing data. It's state level, it's really interesting. There's a lot of insights you can generate there, but you could download it as Excel. So it requires users to go and develop their own analytic tools or visualize it in ways that actually make sense to them. And I think for me, this is one of the areas of the lowest hanging fruit that we have at the moment. And it's a really easy place for central banks to dip their foot in the water, start using the data that's already available, and start actually offering value to the market by visualizing and making available data that they already have. And then as more data becomes available, it's this virtuous circle that then people start seeing what you have, they request more, they help you formulate it, they're more willing to give you more data. And for me, it's a really great starting place for this whole cycle of data generation and use that we're trying to foster in market. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Let me see. I think we have 2 minutes left. Tons of questions that we promised to get back to you and send them to the panelists. So we will respond them and send them to you. And yeah, and maybe I'm going to have the pleasure to close these 3 days of how to improve. So let me share with you that in UNCDF and on our program, the Migration and Remittances program, our vision is a world with migrant-centric and gender-innovative remittances policies and innovations that cannot be made without remittances data and research. I remember I started Tuesday by sharing that remittances are far from perfect. And we spent the last 3 days looking at how remittances data systems are evolving to provide innovative, real-time and more granular insight for economic and financial analysis. So after these 3 days, I acknowledge that 1, measuring and analyzing cross-border remittances presents several challenges, but also we identify success in the implementation of remittances data collection systems that may open opportunities for other central banks and policymakers to strengthen their existing efforts. And final, it's clear to me that technology is here and we cannot, but we need to have technology for innovation. And there is an ever-growing need for detailed insights and remittances automated data-driven systems. So these are my 3 main messages. It has been 3 days of learning and sharing. I personally learned a lot, and I will keep learning and consulting with central banks and technology providers around the globe to support improving this efficiency in capturing, monitoring, and analyzing remittances. Why? To inform policymaking, but also for private sector investment and, of course, product development. In every webinar, I have to share that we have more than 100 participants, including 30 from central banks. We look forward to supporting them in the coming months to ensure that they can exchange learning and build capacities. In addition, we're planning several webinars during 2022 and releasing new papers and new tools, and we will welcome you to collaborate with us. I would like to express my appreciation to the speakers, wonderful speakers, and panelists for the valuable contribution to the webinar. Special thanks to the interpreters who have been extremely patient with me. I speak sometimes really fast. My deepest thanks are, of course, reserved for my team, for the UNCDF team, and their support and contribution to this series of webinars, Better Remittances Data for Better Decision. Finally, if you have more questions, please don't hesitate to contact us, migrantmoney@uncdf.org. But also visit our website and learn more about our work. We have wonderful blogs and tools. Follow us on Twitter, try to consult us, maybe register for our webinars, and consider engaging UNCDF to advise your policymakers or central banks. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Paloma and colleagues.
Thank you.
Congrats, Paloma. Good job.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure working with you.
Marta, I'm looking forward to collaborate with you in the future. Bye.
Thank you. So looking forward to reconnect. Bye-bye. Have a good week.